In a normal or average economy, the data tells us that roughly 1 in 4 sales teams can consistently increase sales year over year. The rest of you, well, you just have to settle for flat growth or mediocrity or worse. But there is good news. You absolutely can transform your sales team's results. You believe that, don't you? Well, you shouldn't, because you can't. It's just too hard. Wait, what? This is Sales Untraining, a very different kind of sales podcast. 3 out of 4 salespeople are failing. They're falling short of their revenue. Why doesn't sales training work? That's what this sales podcast is about. It's your weekly sales strategy guide designed to rewire your sales brain. Hey, welcome to Sales Untraining. So good to have you on board. I hope that you've joined the podcast for good now. And by the way, if you haven't already done so, please please subscribe, and please share with anybody that you think should be in this conversation as we talk about sales training, what's right with it, what's wrong with it, and the issues that we need to address. Listen, I really expect people to be all over me on this one. As I mentioned in the open, many people want to transform their sales results. They want to completely change the direction of their sales team. They need to increase revenue. They need to increase margins. They need to open new accounts, and not just a little. I mean, they really need to change. Maybe they're under pressure from upper management or the owner. Whatever the case may be, is they have bought into this myth that they can transform their sales results. Wait, again, what? Well, no, it's not a myth. The problem is changing your sales results, crushing your numbers. I mean, creating disproportionate results. You know what? Let's just settle for something that we can see. How about just a nice, healthy increase year over year in sales revenue or margins or both? How about that? Well, the problem is that doing that requires change. Again, I don't want to bore you with something you've probably heard a couple of thousand times, but if you want to get different results, you're going to have to do something differently. And we just don't do change very well. What we want to do is we want to do it incrementally. We want to add one new salesperson or maybe change one out. Maybe. You know, we don't want to look at a whole host of significant underlying systemic issues that are just killing us that we need to fix. No. We don't want to do that. That's too much work. And that's why I said what I said. Listen, you can transform your sales team, but do you know why people don't? It's too hard. It takes too much work. It's too trying on each of us as individuals because it's going to be a journey. How do I know that? I recently wrote an article for LinkedIn, and by the way, you'll find the link in the show notes below, but I wrote an article about transforming sales results, and I talked a little bit about Deion Sanders and the Colorado Buffaloes. I mean, who's not writing about him right now as a leader and all of these things, and for good reason, by the way. But he came into a scenario where he had a losing dog of a program at Colorado. Colorado Buffalo fans would tell you that's the case. I don't feel like I'm stepping on anybody's toes. 1-11 last year, hadn't had a winning season outside of a COVID-shortened season a few years ago in, I don't know, a decade and a half. A really struggling program. And I remember back when they were a part of the Big Eight. Yes, I'm that old. When they were actually third in the conference and third in the country. 1971, the game of the century between Oklahoma and Nebraska, the top two teams in the country at the time. Colorado was third. Most people don't know that. And then, of course, Nebraska cheated and beat Oklahoma. Okay, sorry. Had to throw that one in. 35-31, the famous Johnny Rodgers punt return for a touchdown. There were 2 clips, and it's on film, and it didn't get called. Yeah, if I sound bitter, it's because I am. But anyway, they finished 1-2 in the country. Colorado lost to both of those teams. And in the AP poll, they finished 3rd in the country. That's how good they were. They were a storied program. They've I mean, they've developed and put all kinds of pro players into, or all kinds of players into the NFL. Cordell Stewart and all kinds of people, right? I mean, a program that people knew and had completely fallen off the map. So what does Deion Sanders do? Well, he gets hired. He convinces the powers that be that he's the guy to transform the program, and he brings an entirely new coaching staff into the program. And I mean, it's what everybody does. You know, when you come in as a new head coach, you bring your own people. But Deion made waves. Coach Prime made waves because he not only brought new coaches, he brought a whole new team. He winds up bringing in 86. You heard that right. 86 new players. They retained exactly 10 of the previous team. Now, a lot of people criticized him for that, especially old school coaches, you know, not respectful to the players, not, you know, dignified, and, you know, all kinds of criticisms leveled against Coach Prime. And his answer was this: listen, you want me to bring in all new coaches, but you want me to play with the same players that have been losing for years? That makes no sense. We need different players. And I didn't tell them to get out. We said, listen, you're going to change the way you think, the way you do things. And if you're our kind of player at that standard, we'd love to have you. But if you're not prepared to sacrifice and to work, and if you're not prepared to recognize that you may not be of the caliber that we need to actually play in the top level, Power 5, then we're going to replace you. And oh, he was excoriated for that. Maybe you feel the same way. I don't. Okay, I believe, as an ex-college football player, you know, I was on a team anyway, in treating players with dignity. In fact, I wasn't treated with dignity by a coach, but that's for another time. So I have a certain amount of empathy for each of those players. But the reality is, if you've been recruited and you can't play at the level to compete for a conference title or, God forbid, a national championship, right, then you're probably going to get replaced. Why do we need to take 3 and 4 and 5 years to do that? Coach Sanders got paid a ton of money to do one thing: create a winner. To do it legally, ethically, morally. And the fact of the matter is, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, he couldn't have done it because there was no transfer portal, and there's not NIL deals, and there's nothing to attract players to a program that's dead or trying to revive itself in less than 5 years. I get that. But when you have the capability and the tools are there, then why not do it? The point is, if you want to transform your results, you're going to have to do things completely differently. He didn't just bring in a bunch of new players. He changed everything. He changed the culture. He changed the language. I mean, one of the things I found was interesting is the captains don't wear a C for captain. In fact, he added another type of player, but he changed it to L and D. L, leader. D, dog. I love that, right? A place for different types of people who do different types of things. But he changed the language. He changed the culture. He changed the standards. He changed the atmosphere. He changed the expectations. And for that, he was roundly criticized. Well, we're already 2 games into the season, and he's 2-0, including a win against a ranked team out of the Big 12. So what does all that say? Well, it says this: if you want to transform your sales results, if you think you can do it incrementally, and if you think your owner or director of sales or general manager is willing to give you 3 and 4 and 5 years to very slowly transform over time, and they will, then great, then do it that way. But you can transform your sales results year over year if you have the stomach for it. I mean, it's a tremendous amount of work, but you're going to have to address a lot of different things, and you're going to have to do them all at the same time or rapidly in a sequential fashion. You're going to have to very dramatically change what you're doing and how you're doing it. And it is not easy work by any stretch of the imagination. The real problem is that there are systemic issues you're going to have to address, a lot of them. Let me just give you 5. Number 1, the way you hire and the way you onboard your people. 1 and 2, the way you hire them, the kinds of talent you're putting in the seats, the kinds of people you're getting to do the job, you're going to have to change that. Because the fact of the matter is, most companies are not very good at hiring salespeople. Look, I'm not being arrogant. The numbers say that. Average turnover in a sales organization across the country, 30%. I mean, that's a remarkable amount of failure. Number two that impacts that is the way we onboard people. And most companies do not have a standardized, progressive approach to onboarding systematically and consistently salespeople to success. They just don't have that in place, and they wonder why it takes so long to get to profitability or to eliminate that turnover problem. Number three, the way we train. The way we train is absolutely loaded with problems. Talk a lot about them in this sales. Hey, thanks for making Sales Untraining your first listen of the week. And if you find something you like, if you hear something that's interesting, I hope you'll share it with somebody you know. You can find out more about me at bizlockerroom.com or email me, kelly@bizlockerroom.com. Now back to the show. Your top 4%, typically not a great idea to have them become sales leaders. You know why? Because they can't coach. Oh, they're hyper talented, but they don't know how to teach others. They don't have the patience. Why doesn't this guy just get it? What I have to do, hold his hand? I've told him 3 or 4 times. They run out of patience. And so they get very busy doing all the technical details, budgets and reporting and CRM and all of that kind of thing when they should be out coaching salespeople. Hey, welcome back to Sales Untraining, your weekly sales strategy guide designed to completely rewire your sales brain. And we get to the core of the issue. In this particular episode, if you want to transform your sales results, well, that's a heavy undertaking. There's a lot that has to happen there, and it's completely doable. But the reality is it almost never happens for the same reason that transformation rarely happens anywhere. It's such a massive undertaking, particularly in the sales world where there are so many systemic problems that exist and have existed for a very long time in the corporate world when we're trying to increase sales. We're simply trying to put a Band-Aid on a huge health problem. And the underlying causes many times are not even known because they've not been investigated. Well, that's what we want to do here on this podcast. It's great to have you on board. Certainly hope you'll like and subscribe to the podcast and share it with somebody as you figure out that they need to be a part of this conversation as well. And I am really looking forward to hearing what you have to say about this particular episode because, again, transformation is so incredibly difficult. It's not because we don't know how, right? When I say it's not possible, well, that has nothing to do with what we know and what it takes. It's do we have the will to actually undertake the process? You can dramatically change your results, and you can do so in a relatively short time frame if you're willing to invest what it takes to get that done. And the fact of the matter is there's 3 core areas, each having their own set of levers that you have to pull in order to make those changes stick and to make them effective. But 3 major areas that we have to address in order to create the sales results that we actually want. Let's begin with the obvious one, and that is that we need unique talent. It shocks me how we often hire people in the sales world, and I'm very intimately familiar with it because when I first became a sales manager, we had a very extensive training program for sales managers, and perhaps you do too. It sounded like this: good luck. That was it. Hey, we need a sales manager in this region. And because you've been our top salesperson for the past 2 years in the country, we think you're ready. And of course I'm ready. Yes, ego, I'm in. Let's do this. And no training whatsoever. They said right away, you need to hire 2 people for each of these 2 areas that need to be covered. I'm like, I'm on it. I will make this happen. And I had no idea what I was doing. So I looked around and did what other people are doing and continued that throughout a fair amount of my career as a sales leader. Before I figured out that the way we're trying to identify, hire, and attract and retain employees, sales leaders, is just a disaster. It's not because I say so, it's because the numbers say so. The amount of turnover is remarkable, and the amount of mediocrity in selling is remarkable, and yet we continue to do what we've always done. You've heard that one, right? And so creating the opportunity to be successful begins with finding the right people. Famously, Jim Collins in his book, Good to Great, said this. You got to get the right people in the right seats, all of that. But the best line in that book is the very first sentence of the very first chapter. You should never forget this. Good is the enemy of great. So said Jim Collins, and I am a big believer in that. It's really hard to transform when the sales leader's thought process, their mindset is, we're pretty good. Well, pretty good keeps us from being really great a lot of the time. And part of that process is we're not finding the right people. We need unique talent. We need people with the right sets of skills and competencies. We need to set clear expectations, onboard them effectively, get them started down the right path, right? Got to find the right people. Well, that's certainly obvious. In the case of Deion Sanders, it was obvious to him. Got to have the right people. Roundly criticized for that. Can you imagine if you have a team of 12 salespeople and half of them are okay or better and half are not, and you decide you're going to come in and replace all 6? People are going to lose their minds. Well, it doesn't mean you have to, but if you're trying to transform and radically transform the way things are done and the way the culture works and all those kinds of things, it may be a necessity. Or maybe rapidly in succession, we replace them one after another. And that's assuming, of course, that you've done your assessment correctly and you don't have the right people. Some of it is a function of the second big bucket, and that is that we have to have radically focused leadership. We have to have leaders that know how to lead. And sometimes our underperformers are a function of the leader as much or more than a function of the people. Got to have the right leaders. They've got to be well-trained, well-prepared. And again, the expectations have to be crystal clear. They have to know how to coach effectively. They have to know how to create a culture of accountability. They have to know how to develop salespeople to be effective on their own in the field. That's a lot of skills that have to be developed because, mark my words and mark this part of the podcast, being a great salesperson and a great sales leader are two completely different skill sets. They're different. And yet how many sales leaders taken from the field because they're great in the field and moved into sales leadership are adequately assessed and prepared to be great as sales leaders? It's a very low number, unfortunately. Well, number 3, you've got the right people, you've got the right leader, you've got to have bulletproof processes. I mean, you've got to have bulletproof processes, and they've got to be processes. Edward Deming famously said, if you can't tell me what you're doing as a process, you don't know what you're doing. So many sales leaders they're just winging it, I don't even blame them. They've got to learn what that looks like, but you need a sales process that's well understood, well communicated. By the way, when I said sales process, I did not say CRM. So many companies substitute CRM for sales process. Wrong. Absolutely wrong. You have to have a process that's very well understood and practiced, that you can troubleshoot, you can teach, you can coach, you can replicate over and over. That's what creates success long term. Not only a sales process, but a sales planning process. Underlying all of this is a tremendous amount of communication that the leader has to create and use in order to create that culture of accountability to those bulletproof processes. Without accountability, it doesn't mean anything. You can have great processes, but if you've got a leader that doesn't create that accountability, and people just don't know how, well, it's possible. Trust me, you can radically transform your sales results. The question is, do you have the will to do so? I'll see you on the next episode of Sales and Training.
Sales Untraining is a production of Business Locker Room and Pod About It Productions. Music and editing by Doug Branson. To get more Kelly, visit bizlockerroom.com.